right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you're located. My name is Ryan Fragapane. I'm the product director here at AASHTO. Specifically, one of my roles is to oversee the AASHTO Air Safety powered by Numetric product. I'm very excited for all of you to be here today. The AASHTO Air Safety community is one of the fastest growing communities at AASHTO Air. We have 13 states now up and running in AASHTO Air Safety, so we're very excited about that. If you have any questions, comments along the way, you want to know about the software or where do I get started or more details about the upcoming user experience meeting we have coming in September. It's going to be our fourth one. So we encourage everyone to come on out, get engaged there. If you have any of those questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach out to anyone at Numetric, or feel free to reach out to any of those 13 states that are listed in yellow there on the map. All of them will be great to guiding you and getting your questions answered. What I tell everybody is I don't always have the answer. Most cases I don't, but I'm sure I know someone who has the answer. So if you reach out to me, I'll be sure to get you those answers. So before I hand it over to Numetric in Idaho and kick off this webinar this afternoon or morning, I do want to go over a few housekeeping items. So as with all our webinars, we're going to record this. So if there's someone at your agency who couldn't make it, or you were wondering if it was going to be recorded, it will be recorded and it is actively being recorded. So after the webinar, you will get an email from me and it will have the link to view this recording or download it so you can save it at your agency. Because we're recording it though, everybody is automatically muted. So to try to get clear sound and feedback, I don't have any feedback, we're going to mute everybody. Now, if you have a question at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A box. Feel free to type any question you have in there. It can be related to Idaho, Numetric, AASHTO, whatever it might be, and we will answer them. We'll answer some as we're going. We might answer some at the end, but we'll make sure we get them all answered. If we do happen to run short on time, we will reach out and get you those answers after the webinar as well. If we do have some time at the end and maybe your question is a little bit more in depth and we need to have some communication, I can unmute you, so just let me know you'd like to speak up and I can unmute you so you can have a conversation with one of our panelists. So with that being said, there's also a raise hand feature, so you could also raise your hand if you'd like, but if you're raising your hand, we're going to wait to the end before we unmute anybody. So with that, Greg, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. We are really excited to be here today to be sharing this month's webinar, this quarter's webinar. I'm personally really excited about this topic. We've been hearing about it and talking about this a little bit with Idaho for some time now, and it's really exciting what they're doing to help share that crash data across the state and some of the cool programs that they've been able to put together. So what we're going to take a look at the agenda really quick before we kind of get into details here. I'm going to start. We'll introduce our presenters and the topic a little bit. We'll actually have the presentation that they put together for us. We do have a few minutes scheduled at the end for a Q&A. As Ryan said, we do have the Q&A window available now. So I would encourage you, as we're going through the presentation, drop those questions in now. Don't wait for that Q&A time at the end. While you're thinking about it, go ahead and put it in there. We might be able to kind of type out and answer some of those questions in the background. But then, you've kind of thought of your question. If you're anything like me, you'll forget your question 3 seconds afterward. So make sure that you get those in, and then we'll circle back and have plenty of time at the end to answer all of those questions. And then to wrap up, we are going to take a quick look at our Q1 release for 2024. So we'll have Danny Anderson, our Vice President of Product, come in and just kind of talk a little bit about what is coming out next week in our release. So let's run really quickly through our introductions. Today, we are really fortunate. We've got two fantastic presenters who are going to be sharing their story with us today. We've got Josie and Jillian, both from Idaho. Josie is the lead math innovator at One Stone High School in Boise, Idaho. And Jillian is a grants officer with the Idaho Department of Transportation, Idaho Transportation Department. And they are going to share with us today how they have been using crash data a little bit different. They've been actually using it in the school setting and secondary education to help with the math curriculum. So this is a really interesting topic. We get a lot of questions around, what happens when we share this data with the public? We want to get that data out there. We want to get it in people's hands, but sometimes it's a bit of a mystery what happens with that crash data in the wild. And this is a really great example of the impact and power that comes by simply sharing that data and making it available with your communities. So without any further delay, we'll go ahead and pass the time over now to Josie and Jillian, and they will take us through their presentation. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Greg. I'm going to let Jillian kick it off.
All right, thank you. Okay, so hello everyone again. I'm Jillian Garrigues. I am a Community Outreach Grants Officer at the Idaho Transportation Department's Office of Highway Safety, and we are very excited to have this opportunity today to talk about our Do the Math program. We hope this program and presentation today leaves you inspired, and maybe it's something you can implement in your community as well. So this is our team at the Idaho Office of Highway Safety. Our mission is to promote safe driving behaviors so we can have healthier, happier communities in Idaho, and of course, keep roads safe for all road users, whether you are walking, riding, or rolling. And ultimately, we want to reduce the number of crashes in Idaho and save lives. So our office develops traffic safety programs through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and we also collect the state's crash data. Law enforcement across Idaho send us their crash reports, and we maintain that data, analyze it, and disseminate it through our annual crash report and other outlets, including our crash data dashboards, which you see a little snapshot of here. So several years ago, we started working with New Metric and AASHTO Safety to build these crash data dashboards. These are published online with public access, so anyone can go to our website, click the link, and look at the data. We have a map view, as well as charts, graphs, and easy to read statistics. So you see here one of those, it breaks down the youth crashes by day of week. And that's just one example. There's tons you can dive into. You can get in there and click around, look up crashes at specific locations or by our focus areas, so you can narrow down the contributing factors of crashes. It's a great tool and resource we've been using in our community outreach efforts to learn about problems in certain areas of the state. And over the years, Callie Campbell and our team have updated and added certain features based on what we've learned from our community partners and how they're using the dashboard. So it's been a wonderful tool for us, the whole transportation department, and our partners too. So Josie, if you go to the next slide, teen drivers ages 15 to 19 are a huge focus area of ours. In 2022, more than 1 out of every 5 crashes involved a teen driver. And also in 2022, Idaho teen drivers were 2.6 times as likely to be involved in a crash as all other drivers. So our big question has been, how do we get through to teens and educate them on safe driving? And so we knew we had to get into the schools where they're a captive audience. That's where the teens are. And we also knew we had these great crash data dashboards that are easy for anyone to use. So this pairs together so well with the STEM programs, the science, technology, engineering, and math. And if you think back to high school, or maybe you've got kids in school now, when they sit down to do their homework at night, so often the question comes up of, when am I ever going to use this in the real world? So our goal through this project was to encourage safe driving behaviors among teens, while also teaching them the real world applications of math. So we had some great partners through this. We reached out to the Idaho STEM Action Center, the State Department of Education, the Idaho Regional Mathematics Center, to help develop algebra lessons using our crash data dashboards. And we teamed up with Horizon Credit Union to get this program off the ground with grant funding. So Josie will talk more about the curriculum in a minute, but we were so happy to launch this program this past August. Math teachers from around the state came to Boise in August for a state conference where the algebra lessons and Do the Math program were shared. And part of that conference included a field trip to our transportation department. And again, how do we use math in the real world? So we showed these teachers 3 different career paths within our own department. With professionals who do the math for a living. We had a materials lab tour, a fun bridge design lesson, very interactive, and even the basics of flight mathematics with a pilot from our division of aeronautics. So teachers got to come into our building, see and experience how the different types of math they're teaching students are used in real careers. And we did have some news coverage from the event too. So I want to show you the report from a local news station now so you can see it all in action.
The Idaho Transportation Department, STEM Action Center, and the State Department of Education teamed together to create 6 Algebra 1 lessons called Do the Math, Save a Life that use the Idaho Office of Highway Safety crash data to teach algebra and data analysis.
We knew that if kids could look at the data on how the behaviors that contributed to car accidents and deaths of teenagers, that they would be able to save lives.
The safety dashboard shows crashes that happen on Idaho roads and displays it on a dashboard. Teachers will then use this data for lessons like scatter plots, frequency tables, and more.
You can see literally an intersection, you can draw, you can look as far out as the whole state, you can filter down to fatalities or just people not wearing seatbelts or people following too close behind or being on their cell phone.
Dr. Catherine Mills is the math coordinator at the State Department of Education, and she created the idea of Do the Math, Save a Life after she was personally affected by student driver safety.
My daughter, who was 19 at the time, just found out that one of her best friends from high school had been killed in a car accident, and he fell asleep at the wheel and was not wearing a seatbelt. And my daughter was devastated because they always reminded him to wear a seatbelt.
This tragedy took a huge toll on her family, but Dr. Mills knew that in order to prevent this from happening to other teens, it had to be taught and talked about in classrooms.
I think one of the things that is so powerful about this is just how relevant people can be with this. So teachers are taking it to their classroom and they're able to look at their actual community, right? Instead of it just being this theoretical place, or it's like, we're gonna look at a big city like Boston, like we're able to look at Boise, or we're able to look at Blackfoot or Camas County.
In Boise, Jessica Davis, Idaho, News 6.
Drinking coffee every day.
Okay, we'll get back to the slides, but that was a good synopsis of everything together. So again, this program launched in August, but this next story was just published last week in the Idaho State Journal in Eastern Idaho. And we are just so excited. I think everyone on this project is thrilled to see this. Independence High School in Blackfoot is using Do the Math lessons, and several students just took their findings and concerns to the Blackfoot City Transportation Committee. The teacher there had first had the Transportation Committee help grade the students' final safety presentations on this through this program. And then after that, the kids were invited to present to City Hall. So they identified 7 intersections with safety concerns. And then the conversation there with the Transportation Committee turned into a discussion of solutions. What can we do to fix this? And so the mayor says now they're going to actually look into each of those intersections closer and see what safety changes the city can actually implement, and then report back to the students after that. So it's just so great to see the benefits of this program for the whole community of Blackfoot and the initiative these students took. They're really getting things done and making some taking action in their town. So just a really full circle moment for Do the Math. And of course, we couldn't be happier. So of course, we're grateful for teachers like Josie who helped us put this all together. So I'm going to pass things over to her now because she has some really interesting stuff to talk about. And she's going to teach us the curriculum, let us know how it was developed, and show us those lesson plans too. So Josie, all you.
Thanks, Jillian, and thanks for that awesome background and introduction. I want to first, before I dive into the materials, just give some credit to all the folks that were involved in this. So we had Kathy Beals, who you saw in the video. Danielle was also in the video for a little bit. Some other folks behind the scenes were Josh and Dan and Aaron. All of us contributed to one or two lessons to make the whole Do the Math, Save a Life curriculum, which has an awesome website. On this website, the first thing that I wanted to share was just our introduction video. You got to see the news report, but I think this video does a good job also of talking about the purpose behind these materials.
Math is everywhere, at the airport, the grocery store, and especially on our roads. Math can keep you safe when driving. Here's how the Idaho Transportation Department uses math to make us all safer. Every time a crash happens, police send a report to the department's data specialists, aka the crash team, a group of people whose job is to keep records of every single crash in Idaho. The crash team reviews the incoming reports and combines them with all the crash data from across the state. They typically process more than 26,000 crash reports each year. Once they input the data, it's analyzed and shared with many traffic safety professionals who use it in different ways. Engineers use this data to help set speed limits, time traffic signals, or make other changes to the roads you drive on. Planners use this data to determine when and where to build new roads, including to help prioritize the funding of those projects. Police use this data as they plan activities to get unsafe drivers off the roads. It can even be used to help plan safer routes to school. This data is used every day to make our roads safer. Now it's your turn to do the math and save a life.
One of the things that I love the most about that video is a little bit of the story behind the data that is being collected, how it gets collected a little bit, and what it is used for, because it gives a little bit extra purpose behind when we go and show this data to students and ask them to draw conclusions about safety, that it's not just something that we're thinking is a good idea, but it's something that people are doing out there in the real world every day. If you scroll down on this website, there are all the lessons that we created, including Crash Data Scavenger Hunt, which is about focusing on just understanding the data dashboard. It's usually something students have never seen before, so we got to take some time to get to know it and how it works, which I'll do with you all in a little bit. Rather than clicking on each of these lessons individually, I love to go to the download all button. I've already opened up and loaded. It takes you to this curricular resources page. And what I love about this page is that, again, you can see all those same lessons that we already had linked on the website, but you also have this teacher guide, which is a nice summary of all of these. So teachers can either look at the name of an individual lesson and think, oh, that sounds interesting, and they can go, this button would take them right into this folder here. Or if they look at them all, there is this page, which again, I've opened and loaded beforehand, which has a nice summary of the vision behind the project and all of the materials all in one place. So this document is really helpful for teachers like myself to figure out, okay, what are the actual math topics that students are going to be learning through these materials? And it has convenient links to all the resources that they need. But they can also find those resources in the individual folders as well. We have, like I mentioned, our Crash Data Scavenger Hunt activity, which walks students through finding different features of it and looking at how data is collected. We have the Can a Data Story Be Wrong activity, which is about thinking about how data stories are being told when you are given a claim that is using data to back it up. When should you trust that? What things should you look for when deciding if the story that you're being told is relevant to you? The What Are Our Crash Factors has students look at categorical data and frequency tables and think about what are the things that cause crashes most often in their community? And why might those causes be different depending on what community you're looking at? Then what can we learn from mortality rates? Focuses on lines of best fit. Like it says, we're looking at how can we use those lines of best fit to make predictions, in this case on predictions about mortality rates. The should Idaho change the driving age to 21 activity focuses on outliers, and in particular, how removing some groups from data impacts that story that we can tell. And then this final activity is very variable in terms of how folks can use it, whether they want it to be a really structured activity or if they want it to be really, really open and broad. The goal of this activity is for students to look at data and, just like they did in Blackfoot, make conclusions and recommendations about safe intersections and how to make them safer. So depending on the amount of time a teacher has, there are some very scaffolded, looking at specific communities, looking for certain things, or they can take it and, like they did in Blackfoot, run with their personal community and engage in a way that's relevant. And even the lesson plan does encourage them to talk to the local transportation department, their mayor, whomever they can get to hear this story. So like Jillian said, it was a really amazing moment for me when I saw that article also and was like, yes, this is the dream. They're doing it. That said, I am going to dive into a little bit of how I've done these, how I've worked with these materials with students. And the first thing that I want to talk about on that front is just the website itself. So when I introduced the crash data dashboard to my students, this is exactly how I did it. This was the slide that they got to see in my classroom. I made a tiny URL for getting to the crash dashboard, which is still active. You can follow this link to get there. We watched a tutorial on how to use the dashboard, and then I just gave them some free time to look at what they could change and think about, in particular, because of the topic we were in at the time, what data was categorical or quantitative and why. Most of the data on this dashboard is categorical. So when you follow that link, you go to the crash dashboard. And you'll see so many different things. In addition to this main page, which starts with crashes by severity, different crash counts, has the different years. I am a big fan of the contributing circumstances. I think a lot of folks don't think about what all the circumstances might be that impact accidents. I'm also a big fan of by month and by day of the week charts that are in there, because again, I think that's something that a lot of folks don't think about, and it often brings up questions about why is there more crashes in the summer. I've had conversations with students about that where we talked about how we thought it would be more in winter because the roads are worse, it's snowy, it's harder to see, we got rain. And so we had conversations about why maybe in the summer, what could it be that is contributing to increased crashes? And we talked about people having more time off, so there might just be more traveling and driving in general. Students not being in school, so we might have more teen drivers on the roads than usual throughout the day, that kind of thing. So just getting in there, and students love the map feature in this dashboard, which we can see if we click on the summary. We could change to map view. And the first thing my students did when they looked at the dashboard was to go in and start looking at places where they travel and looking at the accidents. Our school is located in downtown Boise, so there were a lot of folks just immediately going to look at downtown Boise. We also have lots of folks commuting. So some looked at areas closer to where they live, where their home is. And I wanted to share some of the conversations that came up with students as they were looking through this. So this conversation was recorded as students were looking through the dashboard in that context I was just explaining. So y'all are noticing over here.
There are a lot of bicycle related.
How about you?
Well, I just started looking at
Okay.
graphs, but I was over here and I was looking at the fatalities, and I was noticing that like almost all of the ones that I found in this area are like pedestrian related. Pedestrian related. That one's not. One of these is.
Yeah, it seems like downtown there's more issues of pedestrian and bicycle related crashes, which makes sense.
There's some things y'all were noticing.
What?
I was noticing that there were a lot of this roundabout, and that's by my house, so I always like think about that when I drive through it.
What I love about these conversations with students was this was like 10 minutes in to just seeing the dashboard. They didn't have much additional things. We weren't into our structured lessons yet, but immediately they were finding areas that were relevant to them and thinking about the safety in those areas. The first activity that we did in our group was the Can a Data Story Be Wrong activity. So I wanted to show you guys just a look at more specifically into this activity. I'm not going to get into all of them, but I thought it would be nice to see what do these actually look like. So I'm going to kind of give you a quick run through of this activity and talk about some of the things students might do in it. So to launch this activity, we have a video that I found on Instagram.
A recent study conducted asked about 1,000 13-year-old gamers what they had done last weekend. 92% of them said,
this video, quick, right to the point, usually gets a chuckle. And then the more important part, the question that I ask after showing this video is, why would I show you this video at the start of a lesson called Can a Data Story Be Wrong? And we start having conversations about how we collect data and why the way that we collect data and whose perspectives we're getting matter. Then I show them this claim. Claim says women are safer drivers than men. More specifically, men are 5 times more likely to be the driver in a car accident. Have this chart that I did take from the data dashboard, and then we have this source that has some more specifics about how I got to that chart. I let students talk to each other a little bit about, okay, what are you noticing? What are you wondering as you see this? And then we start having conversations. Do you believe this claim? Why or why not? What would make this claim more convincing? And a lot of the things that come up is some critiques about the chart itself. Okay, we can see general proportions, but without specific numbers, maybe I don't really believe that it's 5 times more likely. That looks like it could be true, but I'm not sure. Other things that folks talk about is very quickly, they notice this source. And so in my particular community, some folks didn't even know where Camas County was. And so there were questions about that. If it's just Camas County, is it really relevant for me? And a lot of folks chimed in on that date. It ended at 2021 there. So is there more recent data that would change this story? After talking about this claim itself, students get assigned to random groups, and in those random groups, they are given a claim that they have to try to support. And so this is intentional. They're given either the claim A, creating a better argument that women are safer drivers than men, compared to the argument we just saw. B, create an argument supporting the claim that men are safer drivers. And C, create an argument that there's no difference in how safely men and women drive. One thing about having students being given an argument is that we remove some of that like emotional attachment to your personal beliefs, and we're focused more on the data itself and how we're going to be using the data to support our claim. And then it also removes some attachment when we're later sharing our claims, when people are critiquing each other. If you're making a strong claim about something you believe for whatever reason, receiving critiques can be hard. Maybe they do randomly get the statement that aligns with their beliefs, but the fact that it was given to them and not something they chose helps to alleviate some of that attachment with the claim that they're making, and we can focus more on the data story that they're telling. Now, at this point, I would love to give y'all a chance to look through the dashboard yourself to think about how you might make these claims. So I wanted to put, oh, perfect. It looks like Ryan already got that link into the chat. So you can go ahead and just leave me on in the background and start fiddling it around with the data yourself if you haven't already started doing that. And then I'm also going to show you how students and myself have approached this task and what they might see. So going back to the dashboard itself, the first thing that I want to share is just how did I make that original chart? So the original chart was from 2017. So that crash date and year filter popped up automatically when I opened this. So I'm changing that 2018 to 2017, and I'm changing 2022 to 2021. Then over here in county, I'm going to make that Camas County. And the crash severity was suspected serious injury. So now we can scroll down and we get here that same chart of crashes by driver gender. And you can just download that chart directly, and that is how we pulled that chart. A lot of students will just take a screenshot, which also works for getting that sort of information. And then when we're actually in the dashboard and we don't have it downloaded, we can actually get those more specifics about how many crashes each driver gender had. So we can actually be like, oh, yes, 10 is 5 times as many as 2, but 12 altogether isn't that much. If students are wanting to make the claim, or rather assigned to make the claim, that women are safer drivers, this tends to be the easier one to make, as you might know. If we remove all of our filters, and we have our all-time data, and then we look there at those crashes by driver gender, right away we can see that female drivers have less crashes than male drivers. But one of the things that a lot of students will point out is they don't really know how much. We got some big numbers there, but really, what is the difference? So students will often immediately start wondering, what percent, though, are crashes with a female driver versus male? So some will immediately just start and get out a calculator and start calculating some percents that's what they want to add to their data story. There are also a lot of ways that we can make it look visually like a stronger argument. For example, if I change this to Boise County, now we're seeing that larger proportion of male drivers getting into crashes. So visually, this looks like a more convincing argument, but we're restricting those crashes. So we have a lot less data. Another thing that might come up for students is this idea of, well, what really does safe driving mean? Is it just getting in any sort of crash, or do we care about the crash severity? Maybe we just want to look at fatal injuries. And we notice that when we change and we're still looking at that broad, all the time we have and all of Idaho, and we filter it down to just fatal injury crashes, now we might have a more convincing argument that males are less safe drivers because of the larger proportion of fatalities that are caused by male drivers. Some other things that folks have done in this is using the license state filter. Some folks might think, oh, you know what? We have people traveling, we have people visiting. If I really want to make a claim about Idaho drivers, I want to filter it to just licensed Idaho drivers. It doesn't make that big of a difference in the picture, but in terms of the strength of their claim, it's something that students consider. On the other hand, some folks might, there's a bias against people moving here from California. So some folks might want to look at California, and then they might be saying, oh, these Californians are the ones that are making it seem like males are worse drivers, even though the data doesn't totally support that. Another thing that is interesting in here, I think, is the number of commercial vehicles. So let's say there's greater than or equal to 2 commercial vehicles involved in that crash. And then again, we're going to see a much larger proportion of male drivers. And this can, again, facilitate some discussion about why would that be? Is that actually making a stronger argument for males being unsafe drivers, or rather females being safe drivers? Or is that really about who's doing that job? Is there just a lot more males that drive commercial vehicles? And oftentimes, once students start talking about that idea of how often people are driving, going back to this original chart here, then brings up that perspective as well. Is it that males are getting in more crashes because there's just more males on the road more often? Now, if we instead want to try to make the argument that men are safer drivers, it is hard to get the data to show that. Usually, I've seen students do it with some illogical filters. For example, I've seen going to Franklin County and then Bonita City, which I don't think that city is in that county, if I remember correctly. But here you'll see we got really small crash numbers, as it makes sense. And now we're seeing those female drivers looking like a higher proportion, but we've really restricted that data. On the other hand, we haven't restricted the date and time. So on that factor, it's good for encompassing a lot of time. Similarly, Ada County and Caldwell is another very convincing. 100% of crashes were caused by female drivers, but it was also only one crash. Another thing that I've seen in this attempt to try to tell that data story was actually changing the driver gender to female to make it look like more female or more crashes are caused by female drivers. But we also have some more logical thinking of, okay, is there maybe a subset of this that would be more likely to have female drivers in the first place? So one filter that comes up for that conversation is if there's a child involved. It might be a little bit of a stereotype, but we, in the discussions I've had with students, have talked about how if a child is involved, it might be more likely that there is a mom driving the vehicle. So if we change that to true, now it's not super disproportionate, so maybe that goes against those assumptions that we were making, and that's also a great conversation, but it does shift it to something that is a little bit more visually making the argument that females are not as safe. The other thing that is a little bit tricky when students do this is that the group with the larger proportion is red. So as they're shifting things out, they might not notice that the male and female have swapped colors as they change their data. So that's something that I've had to like point out with students. But it is really hard to find and create that argument that men are safer drivers than women. And when we talk about that argument of there's really no difference, going back to that base thing where it looks like maybe females are safer drivers than males, we could also talk about, like I said, is this really making that argument, or are there other factors where this isn't enough of a change in proportion for us to really argue that one is safer than the other? So it brings up a lot of really good discussions, gets students looking deeper in the data. They might be Googling, going to Idaho Census to figure out how many people there are in Idaho in general, how many women and men, and just looking into those different filters and how they impact. And then we go around and they have to make their own slide with a claim. And that's where a lot of these discussions happen, mostly as a larger group, when we're critiquing and we're trying to identify what is strengths about this argument and where are the weaknesses of this argument. After doing the can a data story be wrong activity, I asked students to reflect on how that activity went for them. And there were a lot of great insights. And this reflection actually was at the end of the semester when I asked them to just reflect on the whole experience. And this student, I thought, really well articulated the impact of this activity for them. They said, when we did an activity using skewed data to prove a point we were assigned, we were given time to figure out how to make the data show what we wanted on our own. I love this activity and had so much fun. I wish we had done more like it. This would allow students to draw their own conclusions and present their findings with more independence. And what I loved about this was the impact of not only learning about the safety, this one is more about the impact of that type of activity and giving students the independence and the power that comes from having an activity like this. So students are being impacted not just by the data itself, but by that opportunity to have some independence and make sense of the information. This student also talked with me more personally about how the opportunity to critique each other was impactful for them also. A little bit more on the why is this useful in math side of things. I wanted to talk about the standards for mathematical practice. The standards for mathematical practice are part of Idaho's content standards for mathematics, and they're also very similar to the Common Core standards for math practices. They are make sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reason abstractly and quantitatively, construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, model with mathematics, use appropriate tools strategically, attend to precision, look for and make use of structure, and look for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. And I hope that just as I read that, you started realizing how many of these things were involved in that activity that we just did. The first one, making sense of problems and persevere in solving them, is happening throughout this entire activity as students are trying to figure out what is it that they can do to tell the story that they were given and how to make it better. If they have found something that they're like, okay, I think this tells the story, they're then pushing themselves to think, okay, what is missing from this story that would make it an even stronger argument? Reasoning abstractly and quantitatively is happening as students are going back and forth between what is being shown in the data, that quantitative piece, and what does that mean in terms of the actual context, in terms of the real world. Does this make sense? Is this something that aligns with or contradicts a perspective that I had? Constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others is happening as students are sharing their claims with the group and then giving each other feedback. The modeling with mathematics is kind of being done for them through the dashboard. The dashboard is the one processing the data and creating that graphic. But students are having to interpret that model, and sometimes they're adding to the model based on the information. The other things like using appropriate tools strategically, again, it's thinking about, okay, when is this dashboard useful? And that's going to come out in a lot of the later lessons of, okay, which data am I going to pull and how am I going to process that with another tool like a spreadsheet or Desmos. For example, when they're making lines of best fit or making tables of categorical data, usually we want to take something that we're seeing and maybe process it in a different way. Or identify that the crash dashboard is processing it exactly the way I want it to, and I don't need to use a different tool on top of that. Tending to precision, I think actually one of the things in this activity that is important is that I ask students to include that same source that I did on the first slide and being able to articulate, okay, what were the filters that I used in order to make this? And in a way that someone else can recreate the chart that you just made is actually very challenging for students a lot of the time. And so making sure that they have actually included all of the information, a lot of them will just try to take a screenshot of the filters that they use. And I really try to encourage, okay, can we put that into words? And look for and make use of structure. That one is a little bit more about like understanding formulas. So that's probably something that will happen before these activities. But if they're learning line of best fit for the first time, or they're learning about outliers for the first time, might be looking for and making use of structure and that repeated reasoning as they're learning about them in this context. So it depends on the background that they've had before. I also wanted to reflect a little bit about just not what did students take away, but just how did the flow of it go? This activity, it was surprising to me in that students were very receptive to just getting an assigned argument. I didn't really have any students push back and say they didn't want to make that argument, which surprised me. I thought there might be some strong beliefs that students did not want to make some arguments, but that didn't really come up. On the other hand, this was said to be a one-day activity, but I ended up splitting it over 2 days to give more time for students to do their presentation and critiques. But I think that also had to do with the fact that I hadn't presented them the dashboard before. This activity was intended to be after students had been presented the dashboard. So taking that time and doing both of those things at once added a little bit to the length. And like I mentioned, this was a lesson, an activity that really stuck with students, and it was something that they recalled at the end. In addition to this activity, the other activity that I did with students was the what are our crash factors activity, where students are working with frequency tables and looking at different locations to think about what contributing factors to crashes are showing up. This was one that I asked for feedback on from students and reflections on what they learned. And there were some really cool insights about the behaviors that they were noticing as they did this activity. We had one student talking about noticing fail to yield as a common crash factor in Nampa and why that might be, thinking about the size of the population. On the other hand, we have folks thinking about when they were looking at Boise and Cascade, a lot of the things that came up were thinking about how rural the different areas are, how much population is in a specific area. I liked the comment of, I think that the reason that speeding too fast conditions is the biggest factor in Cascade is because people aren't being monitored as closely. And that made me wonder what experiences that this student might have had in that area. Is it somewhere that they've been a lot and maybe they've observed not seeing police cars as much or something like that? Or is it just something that they're assuming based on the population size itself? Another thing that came up a lot was a lot of surprise that driving under the influence wasn't the biggest crash factor for everywhere. So that was a surprise for a lot of students. And in these reflections, you can see thinking about, oh, and that one on the bottom there notes it specifically that things like driver error, driving too close, distracted driving are more common causes than driving under the influence. That's a big surprise for a lot of students, and I think made them more aware of how important it is for them to be aware of those things that they're doing that are totally in their control as they're driving. And then I just wanted to add on to what Jillian said about the article. I talked via email to the teacher at Independence High School, and what I loved was the comment she said of, life-changing is not an overstatement for my students. So like I said, the way they've taken those materials and run with them is absolutely our hope for what these materials can be. And the impact that it made on her students is just such an important story to tell on what this could do for others as well. And that's what I have to share with you. I was thinking we can go into the Q&A. I can also show more things if that comes up with questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Josie. That was fantastic. And Jillian, thanks for that introduction as well, and kind of the summary of like the data journey and experience. Great job. We do have a couple questions that I wanted to kind of just throw out there really quickly. So the first question we had actually, Carrie, thanks for asking that question. Carrie asked, this is an awesome program. Thanks for sharing. Has there been any discussion about adjusting the lesson plan for younger students like elementary or middle school who may not be drivers, but may be interested and may be able to influence older siblings and parents? So, has there kind of been discussion around maybe expanding the scope of this a little bit now that you've kind of seen the impact of it?
There has actually been a little bit, I don't know if it's with a wider variety of folks than just like me and a particular person, but I've been talking with someone at BSU who wants to do a middle school summer camp related to some transportation department stuff. And if it gets funding, we were talking about how can we modify some of these lessons to use in that camp. So we haven't done that modification quite yet, but it is something that I at least am thinking about. And I think there is a lot of potential with doing that scaling. And I think a lot of it comes down to just thinking about the questions that you're using, just changing those questions and the learning goals a little bit can make the same materials applicable for such a wide range of students. So I am excited about how that possibility.
Awesome. Thanks. And
May
Kelly,
I add to that, Greg?
Yeah, please. I was going to prompt
This is Kelly Campbell. I also work at the Idaho Transportation Department. And when we originally started talking about this program, we did talk about doing additional grade levels as this continued to grow, because we did think it could have a really great potential to not only improve safety, but bring real data into the classrooms. So yes, I think we will hopefully be able to do some grants in the future to expand.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. And thanks, Josie, for taking a swing at that question as well. There's actually one more related question that I did want to tie into that and kind of brag on Idaho a little bit as well. So we had another person asked, have you thought about using this in your civics classes to kind of talk about like different stories and different perspectives? And I wanted to just kind of let everyone out there know that like Idaho is doing some really amazing stuff with sharing this data. I know that it's also being utilized by their driver's education program and instructors in their driver's ed curriculum. And they're actually incorporating the exact same data that Josie just walked us through. And they've got lesson plans and programs put together to actually incorporate it into the driver's ed angle as well. So Yeah, you guys are doing such an amazing job up there in Idaho. The thing I love about this is you're seeing what happens when you put that data out in the wild, and seeing all the different perspectives and all the different ways that people can utilize this data and all the different ways that we can work together to accomplish the goal of making our roads safer. So whether it's through classes or through public outreach or grant funding, whatever it might be, all of these different initiatives are using the same way to or have the same goal of reducing crashes across the state. Sorry, I got distracted. Someone just chatted in, Idaho math rocks, and I would agree. So Josie is a true gem from the gem state. So way to be. Well, I don't, it looks like we've addressed all the questions that have come through, and glancing at our time here, it looks like we're doing great. We're right on schedule. So if you have any more questions, keep throwing those in the chat. We'll kind of circle back to any questions that might come up again at the end. But thank you so much, Jillian and Josie, for taking the time to put this amazing presentation together, for all the work you guys have done to get this put together. You guys are doing amazing. So thanks for taking the time to share with us. All right, let me turn my.
Hey, Greg, we have one hand up from
we
Jan.
do have a hand up.
I guess Jan, I guess I'm going to allow you to, and we got a hand up from Bill too, so we're getting hand, or maybe Bill put his hand down. I'm going to unmute Jan here.
Go for it.
All right, Jan, you just got to unmute your computer and you should be able to speak.
Now, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay. I'm the one who wrote the article for Idaho State Journal and was in the room when those kids presented to the Transportation Committee. It was incredible to see that. Oh, first I should say, I don't think I wrote it in the article. This is an alternative high school. These kids are at risk and they have not had perhaps the greatest relationship with the police. But in this meeting, the chief of police was taking notes and asking questions. This was huge success for these kids to be treated like that. The mayor was also, and the street superintendent also. And there was a good back and forth. They could talk the facts and the figures with these experts in the city. And what they actually did is Shelley asked, the math teacher had asked that some of the transportation department come and grade the students' presentations in their classroom. And two came, one from the streets and the chairman of the committee. And afterwards, the street manager was just floored. He said they had solutions. They're used to just hearing complaints. So he was floored. He said they had solutions and they had more than one. And they were good solutions. So he was really, really impressed. The superintendent saw the article and he called the principal, and he has ordered a food truck to come this Thursday to feed the whole school lunch. So there's that little extra respect for the kids who put in the work. But I wanted to also say that there was one thing that the kids spotlighted in, it might have been the team that I had the picture of, that there was a sightline problem at an intersection because of an RV that was stored on that corner. And so there was a dialogue between the police chief and the kids about what the sight triangles are. And he kind of explained that. They knew sight lines, but not really the triangle. And he said they are actually legal where they park that. And they have asked them repeatedly saying, you're legal, we know that, we can't make you change it, but could you move it? And they've always refused. Well, after the presentation, I don't know if it's the police chief, I think it might have been, went back to this owner and explained about the student's presentation and asked him again,
I mean, he talked about how they studied it and this was their recommendation. And he asked him again if he might move it just 5 feet. And they did for the students. So there's one success. Plus the mayor, I know this mayor, he will do this. He is actively going through this list of every suggestion and going back to the school to present back to them which ones they're doing, which ones they can't because of X, Y, or Z. And it's probably going to be because their state highways are involved. But, you know, they don't have jurisdiction. So anyways, this has been huge for those students. They were, well, they were tickled to be in the paper, that too, but to be treated with respect. I went back to deliver papers to them so they could each have their own copy. And these are kids that some of them didn't even know how to read a paper. They couldn't find they're used to online. But this is, I echo Shelley, the teacher. This is not an overstatement. This is absolutely life-changing for these kids. And this program was a big part of it, but she also coupled it with the badges concept across that. There's 3 states that are piloting that. And apparently they were the first to receive badges and they earned 2 of them. And it was in data analysis, 1 variable and 2 variables. So she paired that, had to write the curriculum for the badges, but your program really, really facilitated that so she could actually do that. So it's awesome.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Jan, for sharing that. What a unique perspective and what a great tie-in to the story. So thanks for raising your hand and thank you for that kind of additional insight and follow-up into that. It's really great to see the kind of trickle-down effects of all of this. So thank you. All right. We have one quick thing we need to cover really quick before we wrap up. Let me open up the right screen here. I did want to just make a quick plug for our next webinar that we have scheduled coming up in April. We're going to be taking a look at alternative design, implementing HSM Part C early in the design process. So make sure that you keep your eyes peeled for that upcoming webinar. It should be really great. We're looking forward to that one. More math, right? More math is always good. I did want to just kick the time over really quick. I know that we're a minute or 2 over right now, but I want to give Danny Anderson, our Vice President of Product, just a real quick second to talk through the upcoming release.
Yeah, we'll be very quick, but just to touch on a couple of things, and for those of you who are already partners of ours, the customer success team's probably already talked to you, but in case they haven't, here's what they're going to talk to you about. So we'll start off with the first thing is the map search. So this is going to be additional capabilities. So instead of adding a filter to go somewhere on the map, now you're just going to be able to start typing in and being taken directly somewhere to the map. So that could be an address, it could be a school, but basically you're going to be taken in to an area without adding any filters or doing anything else. And so you can just jump right into where you want to before you start adding filters. The next thing we're talking about is the safety analysis route selection. We've re-implemented how you're going to be able to do safety analysis from selecting segments and intersections. It's a new front page, and then once you go in to add a section, you can either do it by route and mile point like you've always been able to, or you can use the line tool in order to really get in there and work on routes that you're looking at. So you don't have to know the exact route number, but you know the street, so you can jump in and do that. 2 more things we'll go over. The next one is multi-select filter. Now, instead of having to go and add multiple filters into the application, you'll be able to just open it up. And as long as there's less than like 24, just so it's manageable, you'll have checkboxes. So if you just want to look at those fatal and suspect, like serious injury crashes, you'll be able to right there, click off the box, and now you're just looking at what you want to right away, which would have been helpful to the students who wanted to look through things different ways. And then the last, just going over, there are 3 or 4 other things, major things going in here. Level of service of safety is now a limiting factor in network screening, which is a big ask for a couple of our states we work with, as well as making things easier to work with in network screening. And then the last one is, if I'm looking at something in network screening, but I want to dive into it deeper in crash query, what's the easiest way for me to do it? Well, now the easiest way is to click a single button. So that'll be huge. So once again, we'll just say we do have the introduction of alternative design in a couple of months. Very excited about that. Very excited about the release that goes out next week. We do quarterly releases and quarterly webinars. So these 2 updates are going to be happening going forward. So thanks, Greg.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap up. So thank you all so much for attending. Ryan, I'll kick the time back over to you.
Yeah, no, thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I know what are we, 5 minutes over? So I really appreciate everyone who's hung out here for the whole time. Tomorrow morning, you're going to receive an email that'll have a link to the recording in there. So like I said at the beginning, you'll have that recording in your hands. Feel free to share it with any other agency or group or person that couldn't make it. If you have questions, I'm always available. So is New Metric Team. So is any of the licensing member agencies of AASHTO. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. But I appreciate it and have a great week, everybody. Thank you.